Over the past few years, there's been a hot debate topic among sports fans. Who is the greatest athlete of all time? This question has been thrown around a lot by fans of sports history, but it really became mainstream in 2020 and 2021. In November of 2020, LeBron James had just won his fourth NBA championship. In January of 2021, Serena Williams had a solid run at the Australian Open, getting to the semi-final. Tom Brady quarterbacks the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to a Super Bowl title, the seventh and final of his long career, and his first without being a member of the New England Patriots. All three had their names mentioned as the greatest athletes of all time. I happened to be working as a journalist at the time, and I had a sports column, so I made my opinion very clear on the topic. Whilst I do respect all three, I don't think any of them are the greatest in their own sport, let alone the greatest of all time. If you'd like to read about that, then I'll leave a link in the comments. So one of the things which people argued about when discussing this is what defines a great athlete. Is it somebody who dominated or dominates their sport at levels which nobody else has ever seen? If so, I'd give the nod to Wayne Gretzky. Gretzky has every offensive NHL record under the sun by a wide margin, and he dominated the NHL for 20 years. Is it somebody who can run at incredible speeds, possesses incredible strength, flexibility, power, agility, lung capacity, and whatever other attributes you can think of? Maybe you could go with Usain Bolt or Michael Phelps if that's the case. Or is it natural talent? In that case, maybe you'd go with somebody like Cristiano Ronaldo. It depends how you define a great athlete, but I think it needs to be a hybrid of all three of these. I'll give you an example for why you can't just pick somebody who was dominant in their sport. John Daly, one of the greatest golfers of all time. You can make the argument that he is the most talented golfer of all time, all things considered. But it really doesn't sit right with me to consider this guy who smokes a pack of Marlboros, drinks a 12-pack of beer and orders a pizza all from himself whilst playing a round of golf, is the greatest athlete of all time, even if he was a phenomenal golfer. So with that in mind, to be awarded the title of greatest athlete of all time, you need to be phenomenal at your sport and also be a sensational athlete. There's no better way to prove that you're a great athlete than by dominating multiple sports at the highest level. A few players come to mind when you think about that statement. Michael Jordan was, in my opinion, the greatest basketball player of all time. He dominated the NBA for over a decade. Jordan's individual accolades and accomplishments include 6 NBA championships, 6 NBA Finals Most Valuable Player awards, 10 NBA scoring titles, both of which are an all-time record, 5 NBA MVP awards, 10 All-NBA First Team designations, 9 All-Defensive First Team honors, 14 NBA All-Star Game selections, 3 NBA All-Star Game MVPs. On a per-game basis, Jordan also has the majority of NBA records. He was also a fantastic golfer, not so much a baseball player, but we'll go with golf. Rory McIlroy stated that he had a great short game. He said, "I'd take him against pretty much anybody inside of 6 feet." Keegan Bradley shared a similar scouting report. "I'd say from 30 yards in, his chipping is as good as a lot of pros." That's not to say that Jordan is only dangerous when he gets close to the green, though. He has a nice smooth swing, Phil Mickelson, who played with Mike at the 1991 Western Amateur, was quoted saying. Another athlete who fits the bill is Deion Sanders, the only athlete to ever score an NFL touchdown and hit an MLB home run in the same week. He's also the only athlete to ever appear in both a Super Bowl and a World Series. In 1992, Sanders played in the World Series and he batted .533 for the Atlanta Braves, which took place in October of 92 during the NFL season. A season which he not only took part in, but played well enough in to earn All-Pro honors, which he would go on to do 9 times throughout his illustrious NFL career. The most popular choice for people who grew up in the 80s is likely Bo Jackson. Jackson was an athletic freak of nature on the diamond and on the gridiron, and was a joy to watch in both pro leagues, as you can see from the highlights. Jackson was drafted in the second round of the MLB draft whilst he was still a student in high school, but he decided to attend the University of Auburn instead, where he casually won the Heisman Trophy, rushing for 1,786 yards and 17 touchdowns in 11 games as a senior. Jackson unofficially ran a 4.13 40-yard dash and recorded 41 reps on the 225-pound bench press test. Phenomenal numbers which should not be possible. But perhaps they show how he was able to dominate in 2 professional sports leagues at the same time, for both the Kansas City Royals of Major League Baseball and the Los Angeles Raiders of the NFL. Jackson was well on his way to establishing himself as the greatest athlete of all time, but unfortunately in 1991 in an NFL game against the Bengals, Jackson tore his ACL and dislocated his hip, and he was never the same afterwards in baseball or football. Whilst this is unfortunate and it's not his fault, Jackson never ended up dominating in either sport like he should have done. Based on potential and talent, he may be the greatest athlete ever, but I can't justify giving him this title since injuries cut his career short, and he's neither in the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton or the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. There is one guy who comes to mind who's often overlooked in this discussion. Similar to Jackson, he possessed superhuman speed. And similar to Dion, he was able to compete in championships at the highest level in multiple sports. In 1964, Bob Hayes set the world record for the 100-meter sprint at the Olympic Games in Tokyo, completing the race in 10 seconds flat, for which of course he won a gold medal. For what it's worth, Hayes also won a gold medal for Team USA in the 400-meter relay race, having to pull Team USA from behind, completing the last leg of the race in 8.9 seconds, which was also a world record at the time. An amusing anecdote about that day that Hayes broke the world record for the 100-meter sprint is that he actually forgot his spikes, and he had to borrow a pair from his teammate Tom Farrell. This story can be read about in detail in Bob Shaw's book, In the Long Run. Hayes was also the first runner to run 100 yards in 9.1 seconds, and he was the first man to better 6 seconds for the 60-yard indoor event, all of which were world records at the time. Hayes' records have since been broken. The 100-meter sprint record now belongs to Usain Bolt, who completed the event in 9.53 seconds back in 2009 in Berlin. A fantastic record, no doubt. But I would be interested to see how Bob Hayes in his prime would have performed if he had the same access to modern training which Bolt had. Not to mention the modern technology in the spikes and the track equipment which sprinters in 2009 had. Or the nice rubber track to run on compared to the glorified dirt track which sprinters of the early 60s competed on. Maybe Bolt would still possess the records, who knows? Also, maybe if Hayes didn't forget his spikes, he would have run slightly faster and ended up being the first person in recorded history to run a sub-10 second 100-meter sprint. You can make a case for either one being the greatest sprinter of all time when you factor in the era that they competed in. But one thing that Bolt never did was join an NFL team and completely transform the way American football would be played forevermore. Prior to Hayes' arrival in the NFL, the go-to defensive strategy was cover one man-to-man in the secondary. A defensive back would line up across from a receiver and do his best to cover his man to take him out of the play. When they suddenly had to cover the world's fastest living human, it made the strategy obsolete. This opinion was certainly shared by many across the league, including Cowboys general manager, Pro Football Hall of Famer and Dallas Cowboys Ring of Honor member Tex Schramm. Schramm said that he, Hayes, probably did as much for our game as any one receiver in history because he changed the defensive concepts of the pro football passing game. In Hayes' rookie year, the Olympic gold medal winner was in an adjustment period, and early on in the season, he wasn't as regularly featured in Tom Landry's offensive game plan as he would be later on. But on the occasions he did see the field, he made his impacts felt. In his first ever NFL game in 1965, he touched the ball twice and found the end zone on both occasions, catching a 45-yard touchdown pass from Don Meredith and running the ball in from 11 yards out on the other occasion, helping the Cowboys beat the Redskins 27-7. The Cowboys won the first 2 games of 1965, but they struggled for the rest of the first half of the season, losing the next 5 in a row. When they reached the midway point of the season, their record was 2-5. But they made a push for the playoffs towards the end of the year, winning 5 of their last 7, to finish the year at 7 wins and 7 losses. A quick glimpse of what was to come for the Dallas Cowboys in the near future. A big part of the reason the Cowboys were able to succeed in the last 7 games was their speedy weapon Bob Hayes, who reeled in 46 passes for 1,003 yards and 12 touchdowns in his first season as a pro. In the final 7 games of the 65 season, when Hayes had really adjusted to the game, he caught 27 passes for 611 yards and 8 touchdowns. You can see by these stats how much of a difference Hayes made in the turning of the fortune of Landry's Cowboys. In 1966, Hayes had fully adjusted to the National Football League, and the Dallas Cowboys, for the first time in their existence, was a premier franchise. The Cowboys had an elite defense led by Bob Lilly, Leroy Jordan, and Chuck Cowley, earning the nickname the Doomsday Defense. But the Cowboys' offense, quarterbacked by Don Meredith, was even scarier, thanks in large part to Hayes, who caught 64 passes for 1,232 yards and 13 touchdowns in just a 14-game season in 1966. The 66 season featured arguably the best game of Hayes' career on November the 13th against Washington. He finished the game with a career high of 246 yards and 2 touchdowns on 9 receptions from Meredith, one from 52 yards out and another from 95 yards, which to this day is a franchise record for longest touchdown reception by a Dallas Cowboy. Ironically, it never would have happened if Hayes hadn't fumbled a punt return on the previous play, which was recovered by the Cowboys at their own 5. But as the saying goes, great players aren't always great, they're just great when they have to be. The Cowboys unfortunately lost to the eventual Super Bowl I champions, the Green Bay Packers, in the championship game that season. 1 year later, the Cowboys would fall short to the Packers again, this time in Green Bay in a game which has gone down in history as the Ice Bowl, thanks to the sub-zero temperatures that the game was played in. The Cowboys always seemed to come up short in the late 60s during Hayes' prime, despite constantly knocking on the door, and Hayes playing at all-pro levels in 1966, 67 and 68, and posting respectable numbers in the year after, which weren't as impressive thanks to the defensive scheme changing, but still very good. In January of 1972, the Cowboys finally won the big game, beating the Miami Dolphins in Super Bowl VI by a score of 24-3. Although Hayes wasn't as much of a factor as he had been in the 60s, it made him the only athlete to ever win both an Olympic gold medal and a Super Bowl. The Dallas Cowboys went on to dominate the NFL during the 70s, winning more games than any other during the decade and winning 2 Super Bowls. The Cowboys also recorded 20 consecutive winning seasons, an NFL record which still stands today. Head coach Tom Landry completely changed the NFL with his innovative schemes. Back in 1965, when Hayes was in his rookie year, the Cowboys had never had a winning season, and with a 2-5 record after a loss to Pittsburgh in the 7th game, Landry reportedly came into the locker room and apologized to the team, giving the impression that he would likely get fired at the end of the season thanks to the team's poor performance. The players on the 65 Cowboys pointed to that moment as the beginning of the successful times in Dallas. It was definitely a team effort, but if it wasn't for Hayes' breakaway speed and dynamic skills, there's a chance that the Cowboys don't win 5 of the next 7 games and that Landry gets fired at the end of the year. If that happens, then the 20-year period of dominance where the Cowboys became known as America's team would never happen. As a Cowboys fan myself, I'm very grateful that that period happened, and that Hayes was a Cowboy and helped to set us up for a period of success in the future. Hayes may not be the greatest receiver of all time. He isn't the greatest Dallas Cowboy of all time either. And you could make the argument that Usain Bolt is now the greatest sprinter of all time. But all things considered, Hayes held world records in Olympic track and field with the limited technology available to him in the 60s, and he also played in the NFL at a high level. Such a high level, in fact, that he was enshrined in the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio in 2009. Hayes is the fastest player in NFL history and frequently comes at the top of NFL lists ranking the fastest players the league has ever seen, topping the likes of Darrell Green and Deion Sanders. Hayes in his prime would also be faster than every NFL player in today's game by a wide margin. Tyreek Hill is the fastest player in the league today. He runs a 10.19 without any wind assistance with today's technology. Again, Hayes ran it in 10 seconds flat in 1964. There aren't many athletes who have ever achieved such great success in multiple sports and displayed such unbelievable athleticism simultaneously. So when you discuss the greatest athletes of all time, I would always have Bob Hayes' name right at the very top of the list.